Hello guys, sorry I'm late. Um, I forgot to press the start button. I'm still getting used to YouTube Live. I haven't done live streams for so many years. I was talking to myself for a while and then I realized I forgot to press the start button. All right, hopefully some of you, okay, I see one viewer here. Great. Okay, so since today we have a lot of ground to cover and I'm already late, so I'm gonna start right away. So this presentation continues the previous two presentations in dealing with language learning strategy. As I mentioned before, in the last two live streams, I mentioned that I got from JLPT N3 to N1 in a span of 609 hours. I was in Japan. I was studying Japanese language for just 2 months, and then I passed the JLPT N1 test, which is the equivalent to the Chinese HSK6. Right? I was in Canada for 1 month, and then I was in Japan for 2 months. In a total of 3 months, in a total of 609 hours, I passed the hardest Japanese test I was able to pass. So this is equivalent to Chinese HSK6. And in the span of just 609 hours. And in the previous two episodes, I outlined two of the strategies I use. One is set goals, make a plan, record your time. And the other one is read and listen extensively. Right. And then I got a comment from this one user who says, what are your thoughts on studying with media that is above your current level by using a dictionary to look up new vocabulary / grammar as you come across it? It's hard to find content in L2 that is comprehensible input and interesting to me, whereas there is plenty of interesting content that is not comprehensible, right? So that's a dilemma. And that's why we've created the website / application language player. You can access it from https://languageplayer.io. And here in the Chinese section, we support 200 languages, right? One of them is Chinese. And in the Chinese section, we have over 100,000 videos across TV shows, movies, YouTube videos, dealing with all kinds of subjects at all different difficulty levels. And we have intelligently guessed the levels of each video in our platform so that it can suggest the content that is interesting and suitable to you. And we have bilingual subtitles, and we have intelligent pinyin labeling. So let's say that you are in HSK2 and the system will only label words that are either it doesn't recognize or words that are beyond the HSK2 level, right? So it won't label all the words pinyin. It will label only the pinyin that is above your level. It also shows you English translation. And if you tap on any of the words, you can get this dictionary pop up. And if you have difficulty understanding the word in the context, you can press this Let ChatGPT Explain button. And then ChatGPT will explain this particular word in this particular context. Or it can explain the entire sentence to you, and it will break it down so that you can understand the sentence holistically. Okay, so that's Language Player. All right, so today we're going to cover how to study grammar. This title is Study Just Enough Grammar. And actually, it's just study just enough grammar at the right time. Now, I'm going to clarify what that means. So why do we have to learn grammar? The first reason is there are limitations to implicit learning. And if you recall, implicit learning is the stuff on the left-hand side, right? So for example, reading books, reading stories, listening to podcasts, watching videos, watching TV shows, etc., right? This is a kind of implicit learning that is just picking up language naturally, right? We also call it procedural learning or incidental learning, subconscious learning. We also call it comprehensible input, etc., right? Remember, we covered this last time. So are we able to learn grammar implicitly? The answer is no and yes and maybe. According to this researcher, De Kaiser, in a study focusing on inter alia, gender and number and using an artificial language, did not find any evidence of implicit learning of form-meaning connections. That is, he did some studies and he found out that learners are not able to pick up grammar naturally just by implicit learning. And then another study by Williams, 2004-2005, adding animacy to the mix. Animacy, for example, in Russian, if you do something to some inanimate thing, then the ending is different. But you do something to a person or to an animal, something that's animate, then the ending is different, right? So that's animacy. Whether something is alive will affect its inflection. So Williams, adding animacy to the mix, did find evidence of form-meaning connection learning. So some learners are actually able to pick up the connection between form and meaning. Whereas in a follow-up study, Williams 2012 took a more refined approach, considering not whether or not form-meaning connections could be learned implicitly, but when. Right? So he found that, okay, eventually, given enough time, learners can pick up form-meaning connections. That is, learners are able to learn grammar implicitly. Right? So there's some evidence that this can happen, but not always, and it can take time. So that is why we sometimes have to work on grammar explicitly, because implicit learning simply doesn't work all the time. And the second reason is that learning grammar actually helps you noticing them. What do I mean by that? Well, there's a noticing hypothesis in second language learning literature. And the definition is here, quote, noticing is the conscious registration of formal features in the input. Learners, for example, may notice that the noun in the phrase 3 little balls has an S on it. They may also notice that it signals a particular meaning more than one. In his 2001 article, Schmidt, the researcher that proposed this noticing hypothesis, is careful to point out that learners do not notice rules, but rather exemplars of forms and form-meaning mappings, end quote. And Richard Schmidt, the same researcher here, the same Schmidt, did some studies on Portuguese. Sorry, I'm just gonna double check on my sound, just so that I know. Can everybody hear okay, by the way? Is my sound okay? Because I've done this before. I've talked 15 minutes on end, and then I realized my microphone wasn't on. Okay, there are two concurrent viewers. Hopefully, both of you are hearing okay. All right. So the researcher Richard Schmidt kept a very careful diary of his experience learning Portuguese. And then he noticed that when he was in Brazil, he noticed the things that he learned in grammar class, right? So he came up with this noticing hypothesis. He concluded that noticing is a prerequisite for acquisition. He said, well, you can pick up grammatical elements naturally, but you have to know them ahead of time to be able to notice them and to be able to pick them up. He said, quote, it had acted as a kind of advanced organizer for his later acquisition of the language. Right? He called it advanced organizer, and later on formulated into the noticing hypothesis. And he also used this particular term, consciousness raising. Consciousness raising. Basically, it will lead to noticing and then eventually lead to acquisition. And the third reason for learning grammar explicitly is that it can prevent fossilization. What's fossilization? Well, here it says, quote, but more often pick it up as you go along. Learners reach a language plateau. That is, you reach a certain point where you're just not progressing anymore, beyond which it is very difficult to progress. To put it technically, their linguistic competence fossilizes. It's like it turns into stone, like it's just not developing anymore, right? Research suggests that learners who receive no instruction seem to be at risk of fossilizing sooner than those who do receive instruction. Right? So learners who do not receive instruction, their learning tends to be stuck in one place. It's like animals who die and become fossils, and then they no longer evolve, right? So it turns into this fossil that doesn't change. So for example, my Japanese is an example. When I speak Japanese, I still make some beginner mistakes just because I didn't focus enough on grammar. We're going to talk about that later in the practice phase. So the conclusion is that you need grammar. You need some kind of grammar learning, right? You can't just say, okay, I'm going to do comprehensible input. I'm just going to read. I'm not going to worry about grammar. The sad news is that you actually do have to attend to grammar. Otherwise, you risk fossilization and not be able to progress. All right. Are there any questions? Yeah, feel free to leave any comments in the comment area, and I'll answer them as soon as I look away at the comment section. All right, moving on. So as mentioned here, quote, there are compelling arguments to support the view that without attention to form, that is attention to grammar or correctness, including grammatical form, the learner is unlikely to progress beyond the most basic level of communication. And as Leibniz, the famous mathematician, is supposed to have said, a language is acquired through practice. It is merely perfected through grammar. Right? So grammar has its place. And remember, we mentioned the Foreign Services Institute in our first episode, right? How they have developed a system of the number of hours it takes to learn a language, right? So the same Foreign Services Institute made this conclusion after years of teaching students. They said in this report, quote, another generalization is that some kind of explicit grammar instruction helps most people to learn efficiently. If there is insufficient early focus on form, we have learned that learners may indeed risk automatizing ingrained errors, that is fossilization, right? And successful learners, as I have found on the internet, do attest that they attend to grammar, and that leads to their success. For example, a JLPT N1 candidate named Chen Xinlin Lat took the N1 but failed on her first attempt, just 1 point short of passing. So I'm only 1 point above her. So if because I got 100 points, if I get 99 points, I would have failed the test, right? So the 100 is the passing grade. So this learner, unfortunately, she or he failed this particular test because their first attempt was not successful. So in their second attempt to prepare for the second test, they used the So Matome textbook, which is right here. And they translated the grammar points into their native language, wrote them in a notebook. They said, I review this notebook every day. I woke up before going to bed and even while riding the bus or train. Right? And as a result, they passed the test on the second try. Right? So this is the textbook that they used. Right, so that was one testimony on the importance of grammar. And as for myself, I have studied all these different textbooks when it comes to Japanese grammar. And this one has to do with listening, but it also deals with some grammatical elements, like how people simplify words in their speech so that I can understand utterances that are simplified. For example, instead of saying I'm going to, you'll say I'm gonna, right? So in Japanese, instead of saying shiteiru, they'll say shiteru, right? Sometimes they'll simplify their speech. So this textbook talks about, you can say, oral grammar, right? So I studied all these textbooks, and I attended Japanese language classes in Kyoto University, and they taught grammar in the lessons. They actually went into a lot of details. They got into a lot of rules that's really difficult to remember, but it really helped. Even though I thought that they probably went into too much detail on stuff that's rarely seen. And I also attended some Japanese linguistics courses in Kyoto. One particular element that I learned that's particularly helpful was the pitch accent system in Japanese. And so it helped me figuring out the pitch accent system, and I was able to pronounce the words correctly. So sometimes if you're at a higher level, it's good to dig into the deeper truths of the language, right? Learn the linguistics of the language, learn how the language works in a deeper level, and learn the mechanics and the syntax and the phonology and the phonetics of the language, just so that you can have a deeper understanding of how this language works if you're at a higher level. Okay, now we talked about why we have to learn grammar. Now let's talk about how we can learn grammar. Okay. First, there is the output-focused method, and then there's the input-focused method. Most of us are familiar with the output-focused method. For example, in a traditional language class, you will start with a rule, right? The teacher will mention a rule, and they will give you examples, example 1, example 2, example 3. This is known as deductive learning. That is, you start with a rule, and then you generate some examples, right? This is called deductive learning. Whereas input-focused is an inductive method, where you start with a bunch of examples first, and then you figure out the rule. Right? So these are two main methods of learning grammar. Most of us are familiar with the output-focused method. So let's start with output. Output-focused grammar learning is based on skill acquisition theory. And skill acquisition theory basically is a theory where they suggest that declarative knowledge can be proceduralized by practice. Right? So here I'm going to read this highlighted portion to you. Skill acquisition refers to a form of learning where skilled behaviors can become routinized and even automatic under some conditions through repeated pairings of similar stimuli with particular responses. The theory also proposes that declarative knowledge can be proceduralized through domain-specific production, i.e. practice. It's basically saying practice makes perfect, right? So if you learn a particular grammatical rule and you learn some examples, and then you just keep generating sentences, keep talking, keep practicing the same pattern over and over again, eventually it will be automatic, right? Eventually it will become proceduralized. That it's kind of like learning how to swim, or learning how to ride a bike, and learning how to play basketball, right? It becomes a proceduralized skill, so that eventually you don't even have to think about it, right? So this is the skill acquisition theory. It's saying declarative knowledge, things that you learn from a book, can eventually become automatized and proceduralized. The theory also proposes that I already read that. And then it also goes on to say acquisition takes place by 1, proceduralization of declarative knowledge, and 2, automatization of access to information in working memory through practice. And the general model that is used for this approach is what they call PPP, presentation, practice, production. At the presentation stage, your teacher or your textbook will lay out a whole bunch of rules. For example, this is how you form the present progressive. You first add the be verb, and then you add the verb, and you add the ing, and then you form the present progressive. You learn from the rules. And then you do practice. You do some drills, right? The teacher will say, okay, here are some words, and please put them into present progressive. Walk, I am walking. Do, I am doing. Right? Read, I am reading. So you do this kind of practice, and finally the teacher will say, okay, now you guys talk about what you are doing right now. Okay, I'm reading a book, but I'm finding this difficult, and and then you do this practice, right? Production practice. So this is known as PPP, right? Present, practice, and production. And the suggestion is that if you're using this approach to learn grammar, the lesson should be something like 1, 2, 3. That is, presentation should take 1 part of the time, and practice should take 2 parts of the time, and the production should take 3 parts of the time, right? So you have 1 hour and 10 minutes on presentation, 20 minutes on production, and then 40 minutes, and then 30 minutes on production, right? So the ratio should be 1, 2, 3. And here's a caveat. A lot of people do not understand that grammar cannot be learned in an arbitrary sequence, because there's a natural order to how grammar can be acquired. What do we mean by that? Okay, I'm going to read this highlighted portion. It says, while this research is still far from conclusive, it seems that all learners acquire grammatical items in a fairly predictable order, and this happens irrespective of either their mother tongue or the order in which they are actually taught these structures, right? So I want to focus on the second part, the order in which they are taught these structures. So this is saying that research suggests that it doesn't matter what grammar you learn. It doesn't matter in what order they teach you grammar. You tend to acquire grammatical form in a very predictable order. That is, if someone teaches you some more advanced grammatical structure, right, it's unlikely that you're gonna acquire them if you're not ready for it, right? It's saying that people generally have some kind of order with acquisition, with acquisition. So when it's not ready, when your language level is not at the point where you can acquire a certain grammatical form, no matter how the teacher teaches you, okay, you have to add an S at the third person singular verbs, right? Like he walks, not he walk, he walks. Okay, add the S. But if the learner is not ready yet at the, if the learner's linguistic development is not at that level, then no matter how you teach them, how you drill it into them, how you force them to practice, they're not going to produce that S, right? Not in natural production. Maybe they're able to produce it in the classroom, but when they're talking to their friends or whatever, then they will go back to he walk, right? He walked to the store. So that is the natural order hypothesis. Basically, people acquire language in the natural order. So what does that mean? That means when we learn grammar, we should not aim for perfection, right? We should let our language develop naturally so that eventually it will be native-like, right? When we first learn a grammatical point, we might not be able to produce these forms accurately, but we just have to give it time. And here the highlight portion says, quote, the rules for the use of articles, the, on the other hand, are difficult either to describe or to demonstrate. So despite being among the most frequently used words in the language, their formal presentation is usually delayed until a relatively advanced level, right? So even things as simple as the articles, and the, they occur very frequent in the English language. But because the rules are very complex, so learners generally do not attend to them until a very late level. So to give an example, in Chinese, we can think of, say, the structure 你是怎么来的, right? The 是 the construction. A lot of learners simply are not able to produce sentences like sentences with 是 something 的. No matter how you learn this pattern, no matter how much exercises you do, if you're not at the proficiency level, you're simply not going to be producing sentences like these naturally, right? So if you are doing grammatical lesson on 是的, and you did the exercises, but then you find that, oh, you're not able to do them perfectly, don't worry. I suggest that you just skip over the exercises for the time being, and then just move on to other language learning activities until you are naturally able to produce these forms. And here's another thing that you have to watch out. Sometimes when you're learning language, as you progress, some language features actually gets worse before they get better. And what do I mean by that? For example, for English, let's say there's a student who is producing this form correctly. He is taking a cake, right? He is taking a cake. However, as they progress, when they learn the present form, he will start to say he take a cake, right? Which is wrong, which is not native English, right? And later on, when they learn the difference between the present tense and the present progressive, then they'll proceed to produce the correct form again. He is taking a cake, right? So you're actually gonna see this dip, right? You see this U-shaped learning. situation. So your grammar for some feature is actually gonna get worse before it gets better. Right? So sometimes you think, oh, how come I'm still making these beginner mistakes? That's just because your mind is constructing or restructuring everything that you have learned. So sometimes when you learn new things, your brain gets a little bit confused, right? And then what errors you didn't do, although you didn't make these errors before when you're like fresh beginner, as you progress, you're gonna start making errors. Another example is kids with, say, the past tense, right? So a little kid learning English as their first language might say, "Oh, I went to school," and later on, when they learn that, oh, the past form can be formed by adding ed to the end of the words, right? For example, I studied, or I walked, etc., right? And then they start to say, I goed to school. And later on, as they learn that, oh, there are exceptions to this rule. There's go, and then there's went. And then they'll go back to, okay, I studied, but I went. Right? So you're gonna see this U-shaped dip in your learning sometimes, right? So don't be discouraged if you're seeing that you're making more errors and not less errors. This is just a stage in your development. All right, so here's one other user's experience. As I mentioned before, there's this very successful Japanese learner named Taira no Lunemori. He got 179 points out of 180, which is near perfect in just 17 months from 0, right? Amazing. And he, in his testimonial, he also said that he ended up just speeding through Genki 1, which is a textbook, this textbook right here. He said, honestly, without mastering any of it, I think this is fine and would do the exact same thing again, right? And then he said, by the end of August, I had finished Genki 2, again, just blitzing through it without reviewing, doing practice problems, etc. Right? So this user, instead of focusing on doing all the exercises in the textbook, getting them all perfect, he just quickly whizzed through them, right? So he understands that there is a natural order to his learning. He knows that at the beginning stage, he's not able to get everything perfect. But reviewing all these grammar points at the beginning phase of his learning helps him notice things, right? Helps him notice these grammatical constructs as he reads books or listen to podcasts or watch videos. And then he's able to pick up these linguistic forms naturally in his reading. And that's why he quickly whizzed through these textbooks, so that it will allow him to notice these forms, right? And it also conforms to his natural order. He understands that at the beginning stage, it's impossible to get them perfect, right? So he just quickly went through them. And during the final stages of his learning, he used this particular textbook called the Shinkansen Master en Ichi Bunpo in early May, he said, right? So near the test, he went through all the advanced grammar points as a final review. So this is kind of like if you're using the Chinese textbooks, it's like going through HSK 1, 2, 3, 4 super quickly, right? And going through these without doing any exercises, and just quickly went through them, just looked at the words, and at the same time do a lot of reading on your own, or do a lot of watching videos on language player, or watch a lot of Netflix, or do a lot of talking practice, right? And do a lot of these input activities while paying only a little bit of attention to grammar, right? Just quickly whizzing through these textbooks. And then at the end of your learning, you do more review, like you go through the HSK 5 and 6 textbooks and then do a final sort of final review, final recapitulation, right? So that was the output focused approach, right? Now let's talk about the input focused approach. Again, input focused is an inductive approach. That is, you start from examples and then you figure out the rules. For example, input learning can be done in context, right? So the examples can happen in a text, And what happened? What are the benefits for having for learning by input in context? Now here's an example. Take a look at the following two sentences. The ones that don't seem to think so, and it's a drink. So when these are out of context, it's really hard to figure out the meaning of these two, right? But if we put the first sentence into this context, is it important that Jen comes from London? The ones that don't seem to think so, right? The people who are not from London seem to think so. Right? It's important that, is it important that the gin comes from London? The ones that don't seem to think so. Because though they all have London dry gin on their labels, only one premium gin is actually distilled in London, the city of great gin making. Right? So when you embed the sentence in this context, then the meaning is immediately clear. And then the second sentence too, right? It's a drink. But when you embed that into this particular context, in this particular dialogue, so are you going? It's a drink, right? It's just a drink, so it doesn't matter. I can go, right? It's no big deal. But if you take this out of the context, you think, oh, it's a drink. Huh? What do you mean? What's a drink, right? So that is the advantage of learning in context. Right? When you have this textual context, you can understand the grammar a lot better. There are three kinds of context. There's textual context, that is the context of a sentence within a larger portion of text, right? The text above and text below. That's the textual context. There's a situational context, right? Is it a conversation? Is it a letter? Or is it a sign that's posted somewhere, right? Depending on the situation, the language can be different and the grammar is different, right? And the cultural context. And sometimes if you use translation apps, you realize that these translation apps might not be taking culture into consideration, and they can cause major problems. Right? I've seen was it a TikTok video or is it an Instagram video that Ken sent me? Yes, Ken sent me this video where like a Japanese journalist is using a smartphone translator to try to interview some Chinese tourists, and then he was super polite. He said, where do you come from? But in Japanese, it literally translates into 今日どこから来ましたか? Like, where do you come from today? But in Chinese, it's like, where did you come from today? It just sounds really odd. Like, why do you assume that I came today, right? So, in Japanese, the word today can soften the utterance and make it more polite. But in Chinese, today is just very abrupt, right? So, anyways, I can link the video in the description. It was quite funny. So, cultural context, it's important, right? A lot of textbooks simply just take a sentence out of context and then say, okay, analyze this sentence. But taking sentences in their grammatical context and understanding them in their grammatical, in their textual and in their situational and in their cultural context is super, super important. And another advantage of learning grammar in context is that you can pick up vocabulary and grammar at the same time, right? So it's just more efficient that way. Right? So you can read a piece of text and you can learn the vocabulary words as well as the grammar. And now let's move on to how to do it. Right? Learn things in context, learn grammar in context. You can start with a piece of text or a video or a podcast, right? You listen to it or you read it, right? Or you can watch a video and read the subtitles at the same time with Language Player, for example. You then try to understand each word, right? You try to understand the sentence. But if you understand every word, but the sentence somehow still doesn't quite make sense, I don't quite get it. This is very odd. Then something is probably happening at a bigger level than the individual words, right? Something is probably happening at the grammatical level or the idiomatic level or the cultural level that you're not getting. So in this case, check the grammar. Now, how do you do it? When in doubt, check grammar. That's the rule of thumb. When in doubt, check grammar. This way you prevent your default processing. What's default processing? Default processing is basically the comprehension error that the learner makes. Right? For example, if you see these two sentences, the man was hitting a bus, the man was hit by a bus. If you're an English speaker, you obviously understand the difference. But let's say that you are a beginner English learner. You read these two sentences, the man was hitting a bus, the man was hit by a bus. Okay, you know man, you know hit, you know bus. So the two sentences will appear to be very similar to you. Like if you're a beginner English learner, it's like, oh, what's the difference, right? The man was hitting a bus, the man was hit by a bus. I guess someone got hit, right? And then if you read this other pair, the man has bitten a dog versus the man was bitten by a dog. Right? You read these two sentences. If you're a beginner, it's like, okay, man by dog, right? So if you're not getting it, then there's something that's happening at the grammatical level. If you're not getting it, that means your default processing is getting in the way. Let's take a look at the definition of default processing. So the linguist Van Patten in 1996 argued that the goal of FFI, that is form-focused instruction or grammar learning, should be to assist learners to abandon default processing strategies, and that to achieve this, it was necessary to direct learners' attention to key grammatical markers in the input rather than to try to elicit the correct target features in production. So Van Patten is saying that rather than elicit the correct target features in production, rather than letting the learners just talk and talk and talk, try to get the correct meaning out, it's better to help the learner comprehend the sentences better, so that the learners will abandon their default processing, right? So if a learner uses default processing strategy, we'll say man bit dog, I guess he bit a dog, right? The man was bitten by a dog, okay, I guess man bit a dog. So they'll use sentence order to figure out the meaning. However, the correct strategy was they should recognize that, oh, this is passive, right? Was is a be verb, that's passive. Bitten is a past participle, right? So this is a passive sentence. It's not the man that bit the dog, it's the dog that bit the man, right? So default processing, that is comprehension error, right? That is the a beginner's default strategy. We want to abandon these by learning new strategies, right? By comprehending the sentences correctly, so that we can better form form-function mappings, right? So form-function mapping basically means the connection between the form of a sentence and the meaning of a sentence, right? So when you see this sentence, when you see the form, okay, was, that is a be verb, and bitten, this is a past participle. This form, when you see that, it maps to the meaning of passive. So dog is the agent and man was the patient, or man was the object, right? So the dog bit the man and not the other way around. And this way you abandon default processing and advance in your grammatical understanding. And the way we do this is by doing something called focus on form. The focus on form overtly draws students' attention to linguistic elements as they arise incidentally in lessons whose overriding focus is on meaning or communication. So when you're reading something, right, you're reading a piece of text and the primary focus is on meaning of the text. But while you're doing this, you can do something called focus on form. You can do some grammatical study on the things that you're learning. And the researchers here concluded that focus on form is not just facilitative of learning, but may even be necessary. Right. So the way we can do focus on form is by doing something called structured input. And structured input consists of activities that require learners to process the target structure in a series of sentences, but without any need for them to produce the structure, right? So it's a kind of activity that forces you to process the sentences by comprehending them without forcing you to actually produce them, without forcing you to actually say them or write them out, right? Most grammatical exercises will tend to force you to say something or write something out as a kind of exercise. But structured input here instead of forcing you to produce anything, it forces you to process the structure. It forces you to comprehend it, right? Let me give you an example. For example, you have two images, right? And then you have to match, okay, which one is which. The man was hitting a bus and the man was hit by a bus. Okay? So you have to pick, okay, which one is which. So if you understand it correctly, you know that, okay, man was hitting by a bus, so the man was the person doing the hitting, and the man was hit by a bus is the person, the thing doing the hitting is the bus, right? So you know that this is A and this is B. So it forces you to understand the sentences. And if a learner has trouble understanding the difference of the two, then they'll pay attention to the form. Okay, what's the difference? Okay, the difference is hitting versus hit by. Okay, so which one is the passive? Okay, by is passive, right? So this kind of exercise will help them to abandon their default processing and learn the new grammatical form. Hello. Hi, Omar, Hallie, Vandu, Treo, and Mahmoud. Thanks for joining our live stream. And here's another example, right? Match, the man was bitten by a dog versus the man has bitten a dog. So you have to pick which image is correct. So this is what they call structured input. It forces you to process this input and learn the grammatical construct. Now, how do I do this without a teacher, right? Let's say that you came across some kind of weird grammatical concept, but there aren't exercises like this, and there's no teacher to teach you. What do? Well, we can use artificial intelligence, right? These days, we can use ChatGPT. For example, here is Language Player. This is the frog story that we talked about in our last live stream. Here, you have this sentence, for example, here, this 所见, right? 所见不过. You might not be able to understand it. So what do? Well, you can tap on the 所, and then it will give you the meaning of 所. But then you read through the definition, I'm still not getting it. Well, no problem. You can tap on let ChatGPT explain, right? You tap on let ChatGPT explain, and you get this, right? In this phrase, the Chinese word 所 functions as a particle indicating the scope or extent of something, right? I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. And then later on, you can also scroll down and check the context sentence of this word 所, and you can tap on this 3 dots icon right here, and you can tap on here, let ChatGPT explain. And then ChatGPT will give you the meaning of the entire phrase, the meaning of the entire sentence, right? The Chinese text describes a frog living in the well, and here 所见不过尺幅之蓝. It translates to what he sees is only a small patch of blue, right? So 所见 here translates to what he sees. So you start to understand it. And later on, you can go back to the reading, and then you can tap on the 3 dots right here next to the paragraph, and then do the same thing, let ChatGPT explain, and it will explain the entire paragraph to you, right? So with Language Player, you can learn some grammar with ChatGPT and let ChatGPT explain grammatical constructs to you. Another way is get AI to give you minimal pairs. For example, if you want to learn the passive construct, you can get AIs to give you a minimal pair of sentences that are different only by this little bit, only by the grammatical bit, right? So you have these 2 sentences. This is called a minimal pair. And you can then get AIs to compare these minimal pairs and help you learn. For example, in this case, I'm asking ChatGPT to explain the following Chinese grammar and give minimal pair sentences that illustrate it. 所井中有蛙，终日仰望井口之田，所见者不过方寸之间, right? And then ChatGPT says, great question. Let's break down the grammar of 所 in this sentence and then look at minimal pair examples. And then ChatGPT gave me these minimal pairs. 我所见的是幻觉. What I saw was an illusion, right? 所见 is what was seen. It's nominalized. Okay, so I understand that 所 is a nominalizer, right? It nominalizes the verb and turns it into a noun, right? So 见 is to see, 所见 is what was seen. Okay, 见 is to see, 所见 is what was seen. Versus 我见到了一只狐狸. 见到 is simply the verb to see, right? 我见到了一只狐狸, I saw a fox. So, okay, so now you see the difference. Let's see another pair. 所做 versus 做，这是他所做的一切。This is everything he did, right? 他做了一道菜, he made a dish. So 所做的 is what he did. It's a noun phrase, right? So with these minimal pairs, you can get a better sense of how these sentences work. So that's a kind of structured input, right? So when you have two sentences that's only different by that grammatical bit, and then you understand, okay, these two sentences mean different things because of that little grammatical bit. So then you can understand what that grammatical bit means, right? This is called structured input. And then finally, you can let ChatGPT give you tests. For example, please generate 3 multiple choice tests on this point. And ChatGPT says, sure, okay, here's 3 multiple choice questions. So test 1, meaning recognition. What does the structure 所见 mean, most accurately mean? Right? 所见, does it mean a place where someone sees something, or a person who sees, or something else, right? Or that which is seen, the ability to see, right? Which one do you guys think is the right answer? What does the structure 所见 most accurately mean? A place where someone sees something, a person who sees, that which is seen, the ability to see. Which one do you think is the correct answer? The correct answer is actually C, right? It's that which is seen, because 所 is a nominalizer. It turns 见 into what was seen, right? Instead of see, it becomes what was seen. So that was the input-focused approach. Here's a caveat about input-focused approach. If you don't have enough input, you may run the risk of hypothesize the wrong rule, right? So if you oversimplify things, you might actually draw the wrong conclusion, which is not a good thing. So you need to keep testing these hypotheses and make sure that you draw the right conclusion, right? So you need a lot of input. Make sure that you get ChatGPT to give you a lot of examples so you can draw the right conclusion, right? So you don't oversimplify things. And finally, besides input-focused and output-focused, there's an error-focused learning approach. What do I mean by that? Well, you can, for example, produce your own writing for feedback. For example, this is some Japanese that I wrote. It's actually pretty terrible. I wrote this to ChatGPT and let ChatGPT correct me. So ChatGPT says, okay, この文章は全体的に意味が伝わりますが、文法や語彙の誤りがいくつかあります。So it gave me 3 out of 5 saying that the meaning is quite clear. However, there are some vocabulary errors and some grammatical errors. And ChatGPT says, okay, here are the problems. I'm actually trying to recount the frog story. Remember the frog story from last time? And then ChatGPT says, okay, when you talk about frogs, when you say a frog, because it's a living thing, so you cannot just say hitotsu, you have to say ippiki, right? That is the counter for living things. And then it says that here this desio is a little bit informal. That's kind of strange, right? You shouldn't use this ending. And then it says that I said that the frog didn't believe the turtle. Right? And then ChatGPT says, oh, shinji nakata, this ending is inconsistent with the rest of the sentences in terms of formality. You should change it to shinjimasen deshita or something like that. And then I wrote, the frog got curious about the outside world. I wrote, koukishin ga shoujite. And ChatGPT says, curiosity doesn't get generated. Right? Curiosity, you should say, I'm curious about things. Koukishin o motte is more common. Right? It says, koukishin o motte no hou ga ippandeki desu. Like, okay, etc., right? So then ChatGPT gave me, okay, so these are the key vocabulary you should remember. So I said, okay, great. And then I revised it according to ChatGPT. ChatGPT says, okay, great, now this is 4 out of 5. This is better, right? and then you should fix this, you should still fix this, you should still fix this. And then remember that, this frog, the frog is in the well. It should not be arimasu, it should be imasu, because a frog is a living thing, and with living things in Japanese, you cannot say arimasu, you have to say imasu to mean to exist. This is a super beginner mistake. I still make this mistake, and just remember the natural order hypothesis, right? Like, okay, I make this mistake, imashita, and this tanoshina, like these are, I wrote arimasu and kanoshita, right? These are super beginner mistakes, which I should not make. But remember this natural order hypothesis and also this U-shaped learning, right? As you progress, your grammar can actually get worse before it gets better, right? Because you're learning new things and your brain has to reorganize your previous information and your new information so that you can become a better speaker, right? Yet a better speaker. It's kind of like when you're building it's like when you're renovating your home, for example, right? You have to tear everything down. You have to make your home a big mess before you put everything back and make everything better, right? So there's one period of time your home is actually worse because you're reconstructing it, right? So during this reconstructing phase, your grammar can actually get worse before it gets better. That's why, I'm making these mistakes. I need to better practice my Japanese. All right. So keep in mind that there's a natural order to learning. So if your grammar is having issues, don't worry, right? Just keep learning, keep doing input activities, right? Keep reading books and keep listening to podcasts, etc., right? And keep using language player, and also keep looking at grammar, and eventually the right form will be produced. Right? All right. Finally, we want to mention individual factors. You want to tailor your learning to your individual styles. For example, research suggests that children are more disposed to language learning activities that incline towards acquisition rather than toward learning, right? So children learn better implicitly rather than explicitly. So input-focused learning is much more suited to younger learners. So if you're like teenager or something, right, or if you're like a young learner, you might find that learning through examples is actually way better than learning through rules. However, adult learners, older learners tend to like analysis and memorization, right? So people who are a bit older, middle-aged or older, we tend to focus on rules and apply analytical thinking and generate sentences from a top-down kind of approach. Right? So you have to tailor to your individual learning style and your learning needs. Another example is, for example, if you're just learning Chinese to travel to China, instead of focusing all this time on grammar and learn all these analytical rules, it's better to pick up some useful travel phrases, right? Let's say that your goal is to pass the HSK 6. And HSK 6 is very strict on grammar. You have to be able to find these error sentences, right? These 病句. If you are taking tests like that, then you just have to learn grammar, right? So you have to spend a large chunk of time to tackle these grammar questions, and that's your individual needs. So whatever you do, you have to tailor your learning to your individual needs. Okay. And remember, there are two sides to this coin. There's accuracy and there's fluency, right? If you focus too much on accuracy, then your language will suffer in terms of fluency, right? When you speak, you constantly have to think, you have to analyze, and your speaking is just not there, right? You're not able to get the meaning across. Whereas if you focus too much on fluency, then you might be able to, you might be making a lot of errors. That's the problem, right? So you have to decide, okay, which side do you want to focus more? Are you lacking in fluency more, right? If that's the case, then do more input-based learning and also do more speaking, right? Do more natural speaking rather than focusing too much on the correct forms. But if you're already pretty fluent, you can get the meaning across, but you're making a lot of errors, then you can do more accuracy focused activities, right? Focus on form. There are two approaches. One is non-interventionist and the other is interventionist, right? Non-interventionist instruction aims to focus on meaning. They tend to let the learners just communicate naturally or read books or do these natural learning things, whereas form-focused instruction or interventionist approach tend to force the learners to memorize rules and generate sentences, etc. Right? So there are two sides of the coin, right? Form-focused will give you more accuracy, whereas meaning-focused will give you more fluency, right? Interventionist will give you more accuracy. Non-interventionist will give you more fluency. So there are these two approaches, and you have to decide when is the right time to use which. However you do, like eventually you're gonna reach the same point, right? There are two separate paths. One is accuracy focused, the other is fluency focused. Eventually you get to the same point after a long time, but the path is a little bit different. So you have to take the path that will get you to your intermediate goals. For example, if your intermediate goal is to pass HSK 6, then you probably have to incorporate more accuracy focused activities, right? Because HSK 6 will be testing you on your accuracy. But if your intermediate goal is to travel to China, make a lot of friends, talk to people, then do more fluency focused exercises. Eventually, you're gonna reach the same point. After a long time, you're gonna reach the same point. But depending on your immediate individual needs and individual learning style, you can choose a different learning path. And that's all I want to say today. And these are the references I've used today. And that was study just enough grammar at the right time. Just keep in mind that there's a natural order of grammar learning, right? You cannot learn grammar that's beyond your level and expect you to produce these forms very accurately. I want to say study just enough grammar at the right time, right? When the time is right, you can go back and fix the errors that you're making. But at the beginning stages, when you're just starting to learn Chinese, just get a basic overview of all the grammatical points, right? Just know that they exist, right? De means this, na means this, 如果 means this, etc., right? And then later on, as you get better and better, as you have read more and more books, you have more vocabulary, and you can talk more and more, you can go back and refine your language and make them more accurate. And that's it for this lesson. And the next lesson, we're gonna take a look at review your vocabulary, right? So that you can also expand your vocabulary and eventually pass your HSK 6. And that's everything I want to say today. And have yourself a very nice weekend. Bye, guys.